the air was thick with tension. Miriam stared at her husband's unconscious form, the blood staining the floor in front of her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding as she took in the sight. This was not how it was supposed to be. She had never imagined it would come to this. The room was eerily quiet, save for the sound of the simmering pot on the stove. The smell of the broth filled the air, rich, dark, and heavy. It was the kind of aroma that lingered in your senses, tempting you to take a taste, though something about it felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Miriam's hands were trembling as she wiped the sweat from her forehead. The task was complete. Her husband, once a towering figure in their village, lay before her, his body still and lifeless. The act had been swift, yet every movement she made felt like it had taken an eternity. And now, the silence hung like a curse over the room. Her husband's life was slipping away, his blood mixing with the very thing she had cooked, the broth that would carry an ancient secret, a deadly one, through their bloodline. She had been warned. But what choice did she have? It was the price of the knowledge she sought, the price of a promise made years ago. The door creaked open, and Miriam froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She had heard rumors about her husband's involvement in something unspeakable, something darker than any of them could imagine. But she had never believed it. Until today. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, soft but urgent. "Miriam, what have you done?" Her sister, Amina, stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief. Miriam tried to hide her trembling hands behind her back, but it was no use. Amina stepped forward, her gaze shifting from Miriam to the lifeless body on the floor. You killed him?" Amina whispered, her voice cracking with a mix of horror and confusion. "I had no choice." Miriam's voice was barely above a whisper, her words thick with regret. "I had to do it, Amina. I had to. The soup, he didn't deserve it, but," she trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Amina stepped closer, her hands shaking as she reached for Miriam's arm. "What are you talking about? You can't just do this, Miriam. You've lost your mind. The soup, the manhood, what's all this about? Please, explain it to me." Miriam took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She had spent years hiding the truth, burying it beneath layers of fear and shame. But now, there was no escaping it. Not after what had happened. Not after the secret she had uncovered. "I know you won't believe me," Miriam began, her voice breaking. "But it's not just about revenge. It's about something much darker than that. Something ancient." Amina stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" Miriam lowered her gaze to the pot on the stove, her hands still trembling. "The soup. It's part of a ritual. A ritual that has been passed down through generations in our family. My grandmother told me stories, but I didn't believe her at first. I thought they were just tales, legends from a time long gone. But when I found the old book, when I saw the symbols, the pictures, I knew it was real." Amina's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "You can't be serious, Miriam. This sounds insane." "I know," Miriam whispered. "But it's true. The ritual requires a sacrifice. A man, a powerful man, has to lose what makes him a man. His manhood is taken, and in exchange, the soup gains power. The power to heal, to protect, to give knowledge." Amina took a step back, her face pale. "And you believe this?" Miriam nodded slowly. "I didn't want to. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. The dreams, the whispers, they got louder. And then I realized, he was part of something bigger. He was hiding something from me. And I needed to know the truth." Amina's face softened with concern. "Miriam, do you really think this ritual will give you the answers you're looking for?" "I don't know. But I couldn't live in the dark anymore. I had to know why he was so different, why he kept so many secrets. Why Miriam trailed off, her eyes filled with confusion. "Why he never let me get close." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Amina remained silent, her eyes flickering from the body on the floor to the bubbling pot on the stove. It seemed impossible, too strange, too surreal. But Miriam's desperation was real. And so was the fear in her eyes. "I've made my choice," Miriam continued, her voice steadying. "I'm going to finish this. The soup has to be completed. There's still one more part to this ritual. The final ingredient." Amina looked at her, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I've already taken what was necessary," Miriam interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "But it's not enough. There's something else I need to do." The room was thick with tension as Miriam stared at her sister, waiting for her reaction. Amina's face twisted with concern and fear, but Miriam could see something else there, too, a flicker of understanding. Perhaps Amina was beginning to grasp the weight of the situation. "You're in over your head, Miriam," Amina said quietly. "You don't know what you're dealing with. This isn't just about a ritual or revenge. You're messing with something ancient. Something that's been forgotten for a reason." Miriam's eyes flickered toward the pot. "I know what I'm doing. I have to." Amina's gaze turned to the door, her face pale. "Miriam. I don't want to be a part of this. I can't. But you're not alone. We'll figure this out. Together. Just, please, don't let this go any further." But Miriam was already lost in her thoughts, her mind focused on the next step. The final piece of the puzzle. The ritual was far from over. The door slammed shut behind Amina as she rushed out into the night, leaving Miriam alone in the dim light of the kitchen. The soup simmered, its scent filling the air with an eerie promise. Miriam looked down at her husband's body, her breath shallow. The ritual had only begun. There was still one thing she needed to do. And as she reached for the final ingredient, her mind raced, would this last step unlock the answers she craved, or would it consume her like it had consumed so many before her? The clock ticked slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Miriam stood in the dimly lit kitchen, her hands still trembling from the ordeal. The room was eerily silent, save for the occasional bubbling sound from the pot on the stove. The smell of the soup was overpowering now, thick with something that felt almost unnatural. It seemed to pulse in the air, heavy with power. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, her thoughts scattered. There had been no turning back. Her husband, lying lifeless on the floor, was part of something much larger than she had ever imagined. The ritual was more than just a tradition. It was a dangerous web of power, blood, and secrets, and she had unwittingly stepped right into the center of it. A shiver ran down Miriam's spine. She had known what the book said, the ancient text that spoke of this ritual, the one that demanded a man's sacrifice. But she hadn't understood how deep it all went until now. The whispers in her dreams, the cryptic messages, the odd encounters with strangers, they all made sense. She wasn't just involved in a ritual for knowledge. This was far darker. This was a test. The truth she was about to uncover would change everything. Miriam glanced at her husband's body once more. There was no life left in him, not even a flicker of the man he had been. What had driven him to this point? What had he been hiding from her all these years? He had always been distant, secretive, more so in the last few months. At first, Miriam had chalked it up to stress at work, the pressure of his business, but now she realized it was something far more sinister. His detachment had been deliberate, designed to keep her in the dark. He had known about the ritual, about the price, and had kept it from her. Miriam's fingers brushed the edge of the pot, and the heat from the broth seemed to burn her skin. The final ingredient was all that remained. She had prepared everything else, the man's sacrifice, the blood, the herbs. But there was still one last piece, one crucial element needed to complete the ritual. Without it, the power would remain incomplete, and the soup would never reveal its true purpose. She didn't know what the final ingredient was, but she had a strong sense that it was tied to her husband's secret life. There was something more to him than she had ever realized. Something hidden beneath the surface. A loud knock at the door startled her. and Miriam jumped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to stay hidden in the kitchen, but the knock came again, louder, more insistent. Miriam wiped her hands on her apron and stepped cautiously toward the door. Who could it be? Amina? She had left, hadn't she? Miriam's heart raced as she opened the door, only to be met by the face of a stranger. The man stood tall, his eyes cold and unreadable, his posture stiff. He didn't seem surprised to see her, but there was a certain tension in the air. Who are you? Miriam asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's lips curled into a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. You don't recognize me, do you? Miriam's heart skipped a beat. There was something about his presence that felt familiar, like a distant memory she couldn't quite place. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that contrasted sharply with the humble surroundings of her home. His face was sharp, his features strong but weathered, as though he had lived through much more than anyone should. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, sent a chill down Miriam's spine. I'm afraid I don't, she replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and fear. The man stepped forward, his presence intimidating. Perhaps I should introduce myself, he said, his voice low and smooth. I am Victor Kalu. I've been watching you for quite some time, Miriam. Miriam's blood ran cold. Watching her? For how long? What did he want? 1,000 questions raced through her mind, but the words wouldn't come. Victor smiled again, though it was tinged with something darker. I've been following your progress. I see you've already begun the ritual. He glanced at the door behind her, his gaze flicking briefly to the lifeless body on the floor. I see you've made a significant sacrifice. Miriam swallowed hard. What do you want? Her voice was steadier now, though fear still clung to every word. Victor stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room with an almost predatory focus. I came to warn you, he said. You've already gone too far. The ritual you're trying to complete, it's not what you think it is. The weight of his words hit Miriam like a punch to the gut. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a mix of dread and disbelief flooding her senses. What did he mean? She had followed the book, performed the steps, she had done everything she was supposed to do. The soup, the sacrifice, the ingredients. Everything had been accounted for. But now, this stranger, this Victor Kalu, was telling her it was all wrong? I don't understand, Miriam whispered, her voice breaking. Victor studied her for a moment, as though deciding whether or not to reveal the truth. Your husband wasn't the only one involved in this ritual. He wasn't the only one who knew its true purpose. Miriam took a step back, her mind racing. What do you mean? What are you saying? Victor's lips parted, and he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. The soup, it's not just for knowledge. It's not just for power. The ritual you're completing isn't meant to give you answers, it's meant to trap you. To bind you to something far older, far darker than you realize. Miriam felt her legs grow weak beneath her. What are you talking about? Why would he do this? Why didn't he tell me? Because he couldn't, Victor said, his tone grim. Your husband wasn't the one making the decisions. He was being controlled. Just like you are now. The room seemed to spin as Miriam tried to process the weight of Victor's words. Her husband, a man who had seemed so powerful, so in control, had he been a pawn? Had he been forced into this? And now she, too, was caught in its web? Why me? Miriam asked, her voice barely audible. Why did I have to be the one to finish it? Victor took a step closer, his eyes narrowing with a hint of regret. Because you're the key. You always were. You just didn't know it. Miriam felt a chill wash over her as Victor's words sank in. She was the key? What did that mean? Was she meant to complete this ritual? Or was she simply the next victim? You have a choice, Miriam, Victor said, his voice low. You can finish the ritual, but know this, the power it will give you comes at a cost. A price that might be too high for you to bear. Victor turned to leave, but Miriam's voice stopped him. Wait, she called out, her heart racing. What happens if I don't finish it? He paused, then turned to face her one last time. If you don't finish it, the soup will consume you. It's designed to bind you to the darkness. You won't survive. The only way out is to complete the ritual. But once you do, there's no going back. Victor's words echoed in Miriam's mind long after he had left. She stood there, trembling, her hands still hovering over the bubbling pot on the stove. The final ingredient was still missing. But now, more than ever, she wondered if finishing it would mean her salvation, or her doom. Miriam reached for the last ingredient, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of Victor's warning echoed in her mind, but she couldn't stop herself. She had come too far. But as her fingers brushed the last piece, she felt a sudden shift in the air, a dark, cold presence that seemed to fill the room. And for the first time, Miriam wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Miriam's hands hovered above the final ingredient. It was small, delicate, almost fragile. The dark presence that Victor had warned her about seemed to press in on her from all sides, making the air feel thick, suffocating. She could feel it, like a weight on her chest, a warning, a force she couldn't escape. But her mind was clouded with one thought. She had to finish it. The ritual, the soup, it was all that remained. Everything had led her to this point, and she couldn't turn back now. Victor had said it himself, there was no choice. If she didn't complete the ritual, the darkness would consume her. Her husband's body, lifeless on the floor, seemed to mock her as the weight of her decision pressed down on her. Her fingers brushed against the ingredient, and a chill spread through her body. The power she sought was within her grasp, but so was the terrifying cost. Miriam closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, her mind racing. What was the right choice? Was there even a right choice? She knew nothing would be the same after tonight. With a trembling hand, she dropped the ingredient into the boiling soup. As soon as it hit the liquid, the air in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The soup, once gently simmering, now began to bubble violently, as though it had come to life. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from within the pot, sending a shockwave of terror through Miriam's body. Her heart raced as she stepped back, almost tripping over the body of her husband. The kitchen lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. The room felt smaller, as if the very walls were closing in on her. The soup, once a simple concoction meant for nourishment, now seemed to be a portal, an opening to something dark and ancient. Miriam didn't know what she had unleashed, but she could feel the power surging through the air. She stumbled backward, her hands reaching out for support. Her mind was in turmoil. What had she done? Could she reverse it? Could she escape it? The room began to spin, and the walls seemed to bend in unnatural ways. Miriam's vision blurred as the power from the soup coursed through the room, filling the space with an otherworldly energy. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out all other sounds. Then, as if in a dream, the air before her shimmered, and a figure began to materialize. A tall, ethereal shape, shrouded in shadows. Its form was human, but not entirely, there was something otherworldly about it, something that defied explanation. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the stories, the whispers in the old books, but never had she imagined that such a being could exist in the flesh. The figure stepped forward, its presence overwhelming. Miriam's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, unable to move, unable to speak. The figure's eyes, cold, black as night, stared down at her. It reached out, its hand hovering just inches from her face, and Miriam could feel its power, the ancient force that radiated from it. It was not of this world. You have completed the ritual, the voice boomed, deep and resonant, echoing through her very bones. But you have made a grave mistake. Miriam's heart pounded in her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The being in front of her didn't give her a chance. You think you can control the power you sought, the figure continued. But it was never meant to be wielded by someone like you. The words cut through her like a knife. Miriam's mind raced. What was it saying? What did it mean? She had followed the steps, prepared everything. She had done exactly as the book instructed. But now, standing face to face with this entity, she realized how little she truly understood. Your husband knew the consequences, the figure said, its voice now softening, though still filled with dark authority. He tried to stop it. But it was too late for him, and now it is too late for you. Miriam's thoughts spun wildly. Her husband had known? He had tried to stop it? How? Why hadn't he told her? What had he been hiding? Before she could ask, the figure lifted its hand, and the air around Miriam seemed to shimmer. A vision flashed before her eyes, an image of her husband, bound by chains, his eyes filled with terror. She could see the desperation in his face, hear his voice pleading with someone she couldn't see. He wasn't always the man you thought him to be, the figure whispered. He made a deal. And now you must pay the price. The vision disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving Miriam breathless and stunned. Her mind struggled to process what she had just seen. A deal? What deal? Who had her husband made it with? And why hadn't she known? Tears welled in Miriam's eyes as the weight of the truth settled over her like a heavy cloak. Her husband hadn't been the man she thought he was. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, he had been hiding something from her, something far darker than she could have imagined. You will not escape, the figure said, its voice now colder than ever. Not until the debt is paid. Miriam's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. What debt? What did it want from her? Suddenly, the figure reached out, its hand closing around her wrist with a vice-like grip. A shock of pain surged through Miriam's body as the entity's power coursed through her, flooding every nerve, every cell. She gasped for breath, her body trembling violently. You are bound, the figure intoned. To the ritual. To the power. To the debt your husband left behind. Miriam's head spun. She couldn't escape. She couldn't move. The being held her in place, its presence suffocating, unrelenting. Then, as quickly as it had come, the figure released her, and the power in the room seemed to recede, leaving Miriam breathless and weak. The air was still, eerily silent. She looked around, but the being had disappeared, leaving no trace of its existence. Her body shook with fear and exhaustion, and her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a dream? Had it been real? But deep down, Miriam knew it had been real. The entity, the power, the price, it was all too real. The soup, still simmering on the stove, seemed to mock her. It had been the key. The catalyst for something far beyond her understanding. And now, there was no turning back. Miriam staggered to her feet, her body weak, her mind reeling. She had to find the answers. She had to understand what her husband had been involved in, what he had hidden from her. And most importantly, she needed to know what this dark power wanted from her. But the path ahead was unclear, the choices uncertain. Miriam knew one thing for certain, she was in too deep. There was no escape from the ritual, no running away from the power she had unleashed. The debt was now hers to pay, and she would have to face whatever came next. As she gazed down at her husband's lifeless body, the truth hit her with full force. This wasn't just about the soup, or the ritual. It was about something much larger. Something much more terrifying. Miriam's fingers brushed against the old book that had started it all. She opened it to the last page, the one that had always been blank until now. As her eyes scanned the newly filled page, she froze in horror. Her name was written there, along with a single line, "The debt will be paid in blood." Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had known had been a lie. The walls of her house, once a sanctuary of comfort, now felt like a prison. The weight of the dark power, still lingering in the air, pressed on her chest, suffocating her with each breath. She glanced at her husband's lifeless body, his cold face a haunting reminder of the choice she had made. She couldn't remember the last time she had slept. Days had blurred into one long, unending stretch of fear and confusion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark figure, the one that had appeared after the ritual. Its cold eyes had burned into her soul, filling her with dread. Its warning echoed in her mind, "You will pay the price. There is no escape." But now, the worst part wasn't the entity. It wasn't even the soup or the ritual. It was the realization that her husband, the man she had spent years with, had known all along. He had made a deal that had brought them to this very moment. The book. Miriam's fingers trembled as they brushed against the old, tattered pages of the book that had started it all. She had pored over every word, desperate for answers, but it was too much. The cryptic symbols, the ancient language, the rituals, all of it felt like an unsolvable puzzle. But something kept her going. She had to understand. She had to find out what her husband had been hiding. Her eyes fell on the last page. Her name was written there, a chilling reminder that the ritual was far from over. The words on the page seemed to burn into her mind, "The debt will be paid in blood." What did that mean? Was she the one who would have to pay the price? Or was someone else involved? Miriam's heart raced as she struggled to make sense of it all. The being had said her husband wasn't the man she thought he was, but what did that mean for her? What kind of deal had he made? The room felt colder as Miriam sank into a chair, her head spinning. She was surrounded by the remnants of the ritual, the dark pot of soup, the candles, the eerie silence that filled the air. She reached for the book again, flipping through the pages as if some answer would appear in front of her. But the words blurred, and she had to blink rapidly to focus. Then, as she turned the next page, something unusual caught her eye. There, hidden among the arcane symbols, was a photo. Miriam's breath caught in her throat as she picked it up. It was old, yellowed with age, but it was unmistakably clear. It was a picture of her husband, standing next to a woman Miriam didn't recognize. The woman was striking. Tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through Miriam. Her hair was dark, cascading around her shoulders, and she wore a traditional outfit, something Miriam had never seen before. But it wasn't just the woman's appearance that shocked her. It was the familiarity in the way she looked at her husband. There was something in their connection, something that made Miriam's heart sink. She turned the photo over, and on the back, in her husband's handwriting, were 3 words, "The debt begins." Miriam's pulse quickened. What was this? Who was this woman? And what did her husband mean by "the debt begins"? The weight of the photo, of the secret it revealed, pressed down on her. She had to know more. She needed to understand what had happened in the past, what had led to the ritual, and what the debt really was. The silence in the room was deafening as Miriam gathered the courage to look deeper. She flipped through more pages of the book, but this time, she didn't focus on the words. She focused on the images. There were more pictures, blurred faces, strange symbols, ancient markings. But one photo stood out more than the others. It was of the same woman, this time holding a child in her arms. The child had dark eyes, the same piercing gaze that had haunted Miriam in her dreams. Miriam's stomach churned. Was that child her husband? Or was it someone else? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. She felt like she was on the edge of something she couldn't yet comprehend. With shaking hands, Miriam set the book down on the table and closed her eyes, trying to center herself. The past was catching up with her, but she didn't know how much more she could take. She couldn't stop thinking about the photo, the woman, and the child. What did they have to do with the ritual? And what was the debt that her husband had been involved in? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Miriam froze, her heart racing. No one had come to the house since the ritual had been completed. The only people who knew what had happened were her husband and Victor hadn't shown his face since the night of the ritual. The knock came again, louder this time. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. She stood up slowly, glancing around the room. The house felt empty, but she could feel a presence, an energy that was palpable, as if something or someone was watching her. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to move toward the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle, and when she opened it, she was met with a familiar face. It was Victor. His expression was grim, and his eyes darted around the room nervously. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the space with tension. Miriam didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Victor was the one who had warned her, the one who had guided her through the ritual, but now, she wasn't so sure she could trust him. His silence was unsettling. "I need to know what's going on," Miriam said, her voice shaking. "What is this? What happened? Who is that woman in the photo?" Victor glanced at the photo in Miriam's hand, his face hardening. He didn't say anything at first, and the silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke. "That woman is your husband's past," Victor said, his voice low. "And the child is his son." Miriam's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, his son?" Victor sighed, rubbing his forehead as if trying to gather the right words. "Your husband made a deal a long time ago, before he ever met you. He was chosen for a role in a ritual that would bind him to a dark power. The woman in the photo was part of that deal. She was a high priestess of an ancient order, and she had a son who was meant to inherit that power. But your husband broke the agreement. He left her, and he took the power for himself." Miriam felt the room spin. Her husband, he wasn't just the man she had married. He had been part of something much larger, something far darker than she could have ever imagined. "But why didn't he tell me?" Miriam whispered. "Why did he keep it a secret?" Victor's face hardened. "Because he knew the cost. If you had known, you would have never agreed to marry him. The debt would have passed to you." Miriam felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. She had been a pawn in this dark game all along. The soup, the ritual, the woman in the photo, it was all part of a plan that she had never understood until now. "And now," Victor continued, "the power is yours. You are bound to the ritual. You are bound to the debt." Miriam's mind reeled. What had she done? What was she supposed to do now? As Victor turned to leave, he paused at the door. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said, his voice cold. "That child in the photo, he's still alive. And he's coming for you." Miriam stood in the center of the room, her hands trembling as Victor's words echoed in her ears. "That child in the photo, he's still alive. And he's coming for you." The room felt colder, the air thicker with every passing second. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of everything she had learned. Her world had turned upside down. Her husband, the man she thought she knew so well, had been hiding a dark past, a past she was now part of. And now, this child, the son of the woman in the photo, was coming. Miriam didn't know if she was ready for what that meant, but deep down, she knew she couldn't avoid it. Victor's presence, though brief, had left a chilling mark on her. He had been a shadow in the background, watching over the ritual, but now he had all but disappeared, leaving her alone to face the consequences. The power she had gained through the dark soup and the ancient ritual was hers now. She had been bound to it, whether she liked it or not. Her head spun as she tried to make sense of everything. The book, the ritual, the photos, it all pointed to one undeniable truth: the past her husband had kept hidden was coming to claim its price. The debts were real. And Miriam, though unwilling, was now caught in the web of this dangerous game. She glanced at the window, her mind racing. Was the child really coming for her? Was this what the warning had meant? Miriam had no idea what to expect, but the air felt charged, as if something was on the verge of breaking. As she paced back and forth, her thoughts kept returning to the photo, the child in the arms of the woman. The child who had dark eyes, eyes that were eerily familiar. Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen those eyes before, though she couldn't quite place where. Was it possible that the child was somehow connected to her? Had her husband known? Had he prepared her for this? Or had he simply lied, leaving her to face this nightmare alone? Miriam took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She couldn't think clearly if she let fear take over. She needed to make a plan, to figure out what to do next. But what could she do? The ritual was done. The debts had been paid. And now, there was no going back. As she walked toward the living room, she suddenly froze. A faint sound, barely audible at first, reached her ears. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone was approaching her home. Miriam's heart pounded in her chest. Was it him? The child? The son of the woman in the photo? The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the silent house. Miriam's pulse quickened. She ran to the door, her mind racing as she wondered what she should do. Should she hide? Should she confront him? She didn't know what she was up against, but she knew she wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. The knocking at the door came suddenly, loud and firm. Miriam jumped, her breath catching in her throat. There was no mistaking it now. The child, whoever he was here. With shaking hands, she reached for the door handle. As she turned it, the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure standing in the doorway. The figure was cloaked in shadows, but Miriam could make out the outline of a young man, no older than 20, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. His presence filled the doorway like a storm, and Miriam felt a chill run down her spine. The man's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze cold and calculating. He didn't speak, but there was something in his look that made Miriam's blood run cold. It was as if he was measuring her, deciding what to do next. "Who are you?" Miriam asked, her voice shaking but steady enough to hold her ground. The man stepped forward, the faint light catching his features. His face was sharp, almost strikingly handsome, but there was an unnatural coldness about him, something that made Miriam instinctively take a step back. "I am the son of your husband's past," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "I've come for what was promised." Miriam's heart skipped a beat. It was him, the child from the photo. But now, standing before her, he was no child at all. He was a man, and he carried with him an aura of danger, of something dark and powerful that sent a shiver down Miriam's spine. "The debt," the man continued, his eyes narrowing. "It's time to pay it. All debts must be settled." Miriam could feel the weight of his words, heavy with meaning. Her husband had made a deal. A deal that now, somehow, involved her. A deal that had never really ended. Miriam's mind raced. Was this what the ritual had been about? Was this what her husband had tried to warn her about all those years ago? "You don't understand," Miriam said, her voice breaking as she struggled to keep her composure. "My husband, he's gone. He's dead. What more do you want from me?" The man's lips curled into a slight smirk, but his eyes remained cold. "Your husband is dead, yes. But that doesn't change anything. The debt was never truly paid. And now, I am here to claim what is mine." Miriam's mind swirled with confusion. What was he talking about? What could he possibly want from her? She had no connection to him, no ties to his past, no involvement in his father's deal. But the dark power still lingered in the air, thick with unspoken truths, and Miriam knew in her heart that she could not escape it. The man stepped closer, and Miriam instinctively stepped back. "You can't run from this," he said, his voice almost a whisper now. "You're bound to the ritual, just as your husband was. It is in your blood. You can't escape what's coming." Miriam felt her knees go weak. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but there was one thing she was sure of: she could not let this man, this stranger, take control of her life. She had to find a way to fight back, to break free from this curse that had been placed upon her. "Why me?" Miriam asked, her voice almost pleading. "Why did my husband get involved in all this? Why didn't he tell me?" The man's expression darkened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something: regret. Pain? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, and his face became cold once more. "Your husband made choices," he said. And now, you must live with the consequences of those choices. Miriam felt a wave of fear wash over her. She couldn't do this. She couldn't live with this. But deep down, she knew there was no escaping the path that had been set before her. It was a path of darkness, a path that her husband had walked long before her, and now, it was her turn to face it. You have two options, the man said, his voice firm. You can accept the debt and join me in the work that your husband started, or you can refuse, and face the consequences. The words hung in the air like a threat, and Miriam felt the weight of them on her shoulders. What was she supposed to do? What could she do? I don't want any part of this, she said, her voice filled with defiance. I just want to be free. The man studied her for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. You don't have a choice, Miriam, he said softly. No one ever truly has a choice. Before Miriam could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Miriam stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The man's words echoed in her mind, no one ever truly has a choice. She was left standing alone in the quiet of the night, her fate uncertain, the weight of the debt still pressing on her. What would she do now? The darkness had come for her, and there was no escaping it. Miriam stood frozen at the doorway, her breath shallow and rapid. The chilling words of the man, the one who claimed to be her husband's son, the one who had come to claim what was his, still echoed in her mind. She couldn't move, couldn't think clearly. The world felt like it was crumbling around her. She had been thrust into a dark, twisted reality, one she had never imagined would be part of her life. Every step she had taken from that fateful day when she had unknowingly cooked the deadly soup had led her here, standing at the precipice of something far worse than she could have ever prepared for. The man, his eyes dark, almost devoid of warmth, had left her in the silence of the room, his final words hanging in the air like a thick fog. No one ever truly has a choice. The implication was clear. He had taken her options from her, left her with a path that was as inevitable as it was dangerous. Miriam slowly closed the door, retreating into the shadows of her own house. The house that used to feel like a sanctuary was now a prison. Every corner of it seemed to mock her, reminding her of how little control she truly had. How her life, her choices, had been shaped by forces she didn't fully understand. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was no escape, that the threads of fate had been woven long before she'd even become aware of them. And now, as she stood alone, the weight of the past bearing down on her, she realized that there was only one question left to answer: what would she do now? The house was still, too still. Her pulse thudded in her ears, and every breath felt strained. Miriam moved toward the living room, the same space where her life had been turned upside down. She sat down heavily on the couch, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. What had her husband been involved in? What had Victor meant by the debt? What did this man want from her? Miriam's fingers trembled as she reached for the old journal her husband had kept hidden for so long. The pages had been filled with cryptic notes, sketches, and strange symbols. It was clear now that it wasn't just a diary, it was a record of something far darker. Miriam opened it again, flipping to the first page. The ritual, the one she had performed unknowingly, wasn't the only thing her husband had been involved in. The journal told a tale of a secret that spanned generations, a secret that had always been meant to remain buried. Her eyes skimmed over the words, the language strange and haunting, but one sentence jumped out at her: the bloodline must remain pure. Miriam felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Was her bloodline part of this? Was she part of this twisted legacy? It all began to make sense, and yet it felt like it made no sense at all. Her husband, the man she had loved, had been involved in something she could barely comprehend, a dark pact tied to a bloodline, one that her children would now inherit. The son, the man who had arrived at her door, was proof of this sinister web, one that had stretched its fingers into her life, uninvited. What had her husband done? Miriam's mind raced with the implications. Had he made a deal to protect their family? Or had he sold them into something far more dangerous? Miriam's head spun as she searched for answers. But there was only one way to find out. She needed to confront this man, the son of the woman in the photo, and get the truth. It didn't matter what the truth was anymore. Miriam had come this far, and there was no turning back. Determined, Miriam stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She had to go to him. She had to face whatever was waiting for her. There was no other choice. The streets were eerily quiet as she stepped outside, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. It was a long walk to the outskirts of town, where the man had disappeared into the shadows. Miriam didn't know what she would find there, but she couldn't stay here, trapped in the suffocating silence of her own home. She moved quickly, her thoughts swirling, her mind replaying the events of the past few days. The ritual, the soup, the warning. Every step felt like it was leading her closer to something that would either break her or set her free. But she had no illusions. There was no freedom. Not anymore. Miriam arrived at the abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The place was old, dilapidated, and seemingly forgotten by time. It was as though it had been waiting for her to find it. As she approached the front door, she felt a sharp sting of fear run through her. The air around her felt thick with a heavy presence, and she knew, deep down, that she was about to face something she could not understand. Without knocking, Miriam opened the door. The house was dark inside, the air musty with the smell of neglect. But as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she saw him. The man, the one who had claimed to be her husband's son, was standing in the middle of the room, waiting for her. "You came," he said simply, his voice low and almost amused. "I had to," Miriam replied, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I need to know what this is all about." "Why? Why did you come for me? What do you want?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for Miriam to sit, and she hesitated only for a moment before obeying. The room felt colder, darker, as the shadows stretched long across the walls. "You don't know the whole story, Miriam," the man said after a long silence. "But you will. It's time you understood." Miriam listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she waited for him to continue. "Your husband," he began, "he wasn't just a man of family and honor. He was part of something ancient, something powerful. Something dangerous." The words hit Miriam like a wave, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Tell me everything," she demanded. "I deserve to know the truth." The man paused, studying her for a moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he began to speak. "Your husband and my mother, they were bound by a pact. A pact that ensured their families would remain intertwined, no matter the cost. The debt that was created wasn't just his, it was ours. And now, it's time to settle it. The bloodline must be preserved, Miriam. Your blood, your children's blood, it's all connected." Miriam's heart skipped a beat. "What does that mean? What do you want from me?" He smiled coldly. "I need you to join me. Your husband made this promise to my mother. He gave his word. And now, I'm here to collect what's owed." Miriam recoiled. "No. I won't. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it." His gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You don't have a choice. You never did." The words felt like a final blow. Miriam could no longer deny the truth. The choices her husband had made had bound them all, her children, her husband, to a past they could never escape. "But I'll make it simple for you," the man continued. "You can join me, as your husband once did, and the power of the bloodline will be yours. Or, you can refuse, and I will take what's mine anyway. But make no mistake, Miriam, there are consequences for defying the pact." Miriam stood, her heart racing. She couldn't do this. She couldn't be a part of whatever this was. "I won't be part of your curse," she said, her voice fierce. "I will fight this with everything I have." The man's eyes darkened, but his lips twisted into something resembling a grin. "Then you've chosen." Miriam felt the weight of his words settle around her like a suffocating blanket. There was no escape. No turning back. Her life was tied to this legacy, whether she liked it or not. As she turned to leave, the man called after her, his voice cutting through the air. You can't outrun destiny, Miriam. It's already found you. Miriam didn't look back. She couldn't. But she knew, in her heart, that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come.